Hey there, everybody. Let me know if the lighting is good. No one has come in yet, but someone gets in. I'm gonna ask if the lighting is good. If you guys can see me well. Um, yeah, I don't think so. I think they need an extra light. Um, I'm gonna be right back with my charger so that I can put this in. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. I'm back, everybody. Hello, everybody. Charging, okay. And now I'll get some extra light so you guys can see me better. If you're watching on the catch-up crew, just skip forward because I'll start reading in a second. Let me see. Ah, much better, right, guys? Way better. Okay, well, we're back again after a long while. Haven't done a video in what was it? 5 days ago, which is quite a bit on this channel. I try to do as I did before in the animal farm. I did daily every single day. I was doing a new reading for 1 hour, which kind of tired me out a little bit. So I had a small break, and then I did I did after in a few days after I did this one, Pompey the Great, the first part, and then I did the Enchanted Wood the day after. And now, after 5 days, we're back again for another. So yeah, let me check if anybody else is going to be entering. Will anyone else enter? Let's see. Hopefully more people enter. Because I sent this to a bunch of people. But if they're not going to enter, that's okay. Okay. Well, let me get this light forward. Okay, well, let's get to it. Pompey the Great. And we're back again on page 20. We're starting to get crazy on the end of the last chapter, so on the end of the last part, because this isn't, I didn't read a full chapter because these chapters are long. Look at the size of these pages. Pretty long. Anyways, let's get to it. Strabo Strabo was not granted a peaceful funeral by a grateful people. His body was dragged through the streets on a hook by the mob until order was restored by the tribunes. Ancient sources agree that Strabo was universally hated because of this avarice because of his avarice and because he was greatly feared, and also perhaps as a result of his ambivalent ambivalent attitude and his delay in taking action to save Rome. This last conjecture is probably a, a retrospective judgment, a product of inimical propaganda after an event, since in effect such a demonstration on this score would be tantamount to an open criticism of the new regime of Marius and Cinna. At a time when the two of them were settling old scores and hunting down adversaries, any speculation as to what Strabo may have planned is redundant. but some authorities considered that he was aiming for his second consulship and was prepared to go to any lengths to reach it, joining no party or faction, but attempting to play off one against the other. As a result, neither Marius nor Cinna nor the Senate trusted him, and he was not an ardent supporter of Sulla. Self-interest was presumably his driving force. After his father's death, Pompey entered upon a difficult phase in his life. Cinna's men ransacked his house in Rome. He escaped the absolute carnage of Marius's pro, proprecu- pro, pros- proscriptions, either because of his youth and relative lack of importance, or possibly because Marius died soon after his return to Rome and did not have a chance to add Pompey's name to the lists. More importantly, no one else added his name either, though it was a common practice to do so, in the expectation of taking over the property of the proscribed. Pompey escaped with his life, but not entirely without some of the booty from Asculum. Fortunately, he found allies to defend him. These were the censor Lucius Marius Philippus and the orator Quintus Hortensius, later to be the great rival of Marcus Tullius Cicero in the law courts. Another politician who spoke for Pompey was Gnaeus Papirius Sarbo, who was to be consul with Cinna in 85, and within a short time after Pompey's adversary and finally victim. The young Pompey may not have enjoyed the support of a huge ci- clientela in Rome, but he certainly had high-powered friends as he faced prosecution, even though it could be considered that each of his defendants might have been acting purely out of self-interest to advance their own careers. But Pompey's innate charm and his youthful good looks that reminded people of Alexander the Great, coupled with real ability to also play a part in his defense. Anticius, the president of the court, was sympathetic, alleged, allegedly impressed with the way in which Pompey was able to defend himself. One of Strabo's freedmen was found guilty of stealing some of the booty from Asculum. Modern opinion differs as to whether he was really guilty or whether there was some machination on Pompey's part to shift the blame. Ultimately, it depends on perception of Pompey's character as an innocent and honest youth, or alterna- alternatively a scheming brat, a worthy successor to the avaricious Strabo. Before the trial came to an end, Pompey was already betrothed to Antiochus's daughter, and though it was supposed to be a secret, when he finally quieted the crowd of spectators began t- when he finally quieted the crowd of spectators began to sing wedding songs. The marriage took place some time later. After the trial, nothing is known of Pompey for nearly 3 years. He would need to rebuild or repair his house, attend to his estates in Picenum, gather a following if he could, and amass wealth. Perhaps the political scene was not conductive to the regular career path via junior magistracies, though the post of quaestor and praetor, but I'm sorry, I read it wrong. Perhaps the political scene was not conducive to the regular career path via junior magistracies, though the post of quaestor and praetor. But whatever his reasons may have been, Pompey seemingly did not even think of pursuing the line of personal advancement. The city and the wider Roman world were dominated by Cinna, who held the consulship every year from 86 to 84, with Papirius Carbo as his colleague for the last 2 years. Pompey was indelibly dyed with the colors of Strabo, which did not make him a natural ally of the party of Marius and Cinna. So he presumably chose to keep a low profile, act circumspect, circumspectly, and wait for better times. There are signs that he perhaps tried to join Cinna in an uneasy alliance by about 84, but there is a strange and probable garble story current in that year, that he feared for his life and left Rome for some time, possibly to his estates in Picenum. His disappearance gave a rise to the rumor that Cinna had done away with him, and the soldiers in Cinna's army supposedly rioted because they thought that Pompey had been murdered. Once again, this had been retropre- retrospective, a retrospective inflation of his importance. He was in the early 20s, held no specific posts or political office, commanded no troops, and headed no faction. He could not be a serious rival to Cinna, and as has been pointed out, there was no reason why Cinna's troops should care about him, dead or alive, nor is there any millage in the theory that when Cinna was killed in 84, Pompey was somehow implicated in his death. At that moment he was not in any position to gain anything. Papirius Sarbo remained in office as sole consul after the death of his colleague, but his star was waning. Sulla was growing Sulla's was growing ever brighter. His victories against Mithridates and his seemingly invincibility against the armies sent by Cinna to wipe out far away from Rome spread fear in the city. Soldiers were no longer willing to go fight Sulla, especially since they would probably have to fight Mithridates as well. The last the last troops that were sent to Greece never completed their journey, battered by storms at sea in which many lost their lives. The survivors returned to Italy in no mood to hear a speech by Cinna about discipline and the interests of the state. They killed him and went home. Sarbo did not attempt to raise another army to fight Sulla in Greece, but concentrated upon preparing to meet him in Italy, for Sulla was ready to come home. It was known in the first months of 83 that he had left Athens and was about to embark for Italy. The only reality in Roman life for the foreseeable future was going to revolve around Sulla and the 23-year-old Pompey, quietly and the 23-year-old Pompey quietly made a decision that was to shape the rest of his life. He gathered his plans and started to recruit troops in Picenum. Not sure if it's Picenum or Picenum, but yeah, anyway. I'm going to keep calling it Picenum. When he began to raise troops, he had no idea whether he would be annihilated before Sulla arrived in Italy, or whether Sulla himself might be defeated and having declared for him so firmly, it was doubtful that he would survive whatever regime arose after Sulla was gone. It was a gamble, but Pompey was not alone in taking it. Metellus Pius and Marcus Licinius Crassus were both recruiting from among their clients with the intention of bringing their armies to fight for Sulla. But Pompey was certainly the youngest and less well connected of the three. He started out at, at Auximum with nothing but his own resources, with which to pay and equip his troops. There was a first fierce competition from recruiting agents sent by Sarbo to round up men for his own armies, but Pompey was more popular, and within a short time also the oh, he was also stronger. He was also the stronger. He was able to send Sarbo's men packing, leaving the field clear for his own recruiting purposes. From Auximum, he progressed to other towns until he commanded about 6,000 men, or roughly one legion. This modest beginning is perhaps more credible than Plutarch's account, in which it is suggested that Pompey raised three legions all at once. Certainly by the time he finished the campaign, his armies had grown to 3 legions, but this might have been a gradual process as his successes were reported, and as consequence his reputation spread far and wide. It may have been during his first recruiting drive that Titus Labienus, Au- Aulus, Aulus Gabinius, and Lucius Afranius joined him. He appointed officers to command his troops, and these men, all from his home area of Picenum, were probably the, among first to be offered posts in his army. They all enjoyed or endured a long association with him. Labienus became a trusted and capable officer of Caesar's army in Gaul, but returned to Pompey when the civil war broke out to change from a somewhat ruthless but efficient officer to a downright bloodthirsty opponent of Caesar. Aulus Gabinius mounted an expedition to Egypt to restore Ptolemy Auletes to the throne, and later he was instrumental in gaining for Pompey the Eastern command that sealed his reputation as the foremost general of the day. Gabinius became consul in 58, but ultimately gained little reward from Pompey for his services, being prosecuted and condemned for extortion whilst governor of Syria, even though Pompey hired Marcus Tullius Cicero to defend him. Lucius Afranius was with Pompey until the end. He was defeated by Caesar whilst holding Spain for Pompey during the civil war. He was allowed to join Pompey in Greece and survived the battle of Pharsalus, but was captured and executed after Thapsus. Another Pic- Byzantine, Byzantine who was older than these men was Marcus Petraius, who was already a soldier during the Social War. He may have been one of the officers in Strabo's army, though he is not named on the inscription listing the members of the general's concilium. When he was ready, Pompey set out with his small army, moving not particularly hastily southwards to meet Sulla, who had landed at Brundisium and was marching to Rome, astonishingly unopposed for some considerable distance. Before he could join up with Sulla, Pompey had to fight the armies of Sabo sent against him, no less than 3 of them under 3 different generals. Before the 3 armies united, Pompey attacked the nearest one, taking an energetic part in the fighting. Salvo, Salvo, Salvo had recruited Celtic cavalry, and it was against these troops that Pompey launched an attack, leading it himself and killing the commander. And the three generals seem to have been dismayed by Pompey's early and rapid success, and could not agree on what to do next, thus losing the opportunity to act together and converge on him. Thus Pompey escaped defeat, but the presence of Carbo's troops delayed his march southwards, so that he remained in the north consulate to consolidate his position. Sulla was finally blocked on his march towards Rome by 2 armies, one at the river of Volturnus and another near the town of Tianum. It was the first time that the Marian troops encountered Sulla and his experienced soldiers, and they failed to unite to meet him. I'm just going to check something very quickly, everybody. So, um, 1 second. Second, guys. Sorry. I'll be a second. I'm just checking if. Okay. Having carved his way relatively easily through the army attempting to hold the river line, Sulla moved on to Tianum, where he won hands down by a calculated ruse rather than by bloody fighting. The enemy delusioned was already delusioned. They had seen how easily Sulla defeated the army on Vulturnus and were not eager to fight. After a short armistice, while his men infiltrated the enemy ranks and spread more fear and discontent, Sulla pretended that the Marians had infringed the terms of the agreement and drew up his army in battle order. But there was no battle. The enemy came over to in ma- him in mass. There remained vast tracts of Italy still loyal to the Marian cause, except around Picenum, where Pompey was operating. It is not certain when Sulla heard of Pompey's successes against the three different armies, but as soon as he could, he marched to meet him. Plutarch reports the occasion. Pompey brought up his victorious troops, all well equipped and looking splendid, and hailed Sulla very properly as Imperator, an honorary title bestowed on victorious generals by their soldiers, a name that would be absorbed into ti- titulature of the emperors as part of infrastructure of their part of part of the infrastructure of their power. It was not a word to be idly used, and it carried wide-ranging connotations. It therefore meant a great deal when Sulla dismounted, approached Pompey on foot, and returned to the compliment by also hailing the young man as Imperator. He would have been fully aware of what he was doing, and once uttered for the benefit of Pompey's army. He could hardly retract the title. For Pompey, it will have been a superb moment, one to savor until he topped it by other successes. His gamble had paid off superbly. Sulla approved and rewarded him, and the faith of his troops already had in him. Sorry, his gamble had paid off superbly. Sulla approved and rewarded him, and the faith that his troops already had in him could only be enhanced when the soldiers saw how the great general favored his young protege. According to Plutarch, whenever Pompey Sulla would rise and remove his head covering as a mark of respect. He did this only he did this for only a few select people, so everyone in Sulla's immediate circle would be aware that Pompey was highly regarded and destined for greater things. At this point, when Sulla marched north to meet the little army that Pompey had raised, it was not all certain that there would be an ultimate victory. The war in Italy had still to be won. Rome itself was not prepared to welcome Sulla, and most people acquiesced when Carbo, Papirius Sarbo and the young Marius, son of the dead general, were elected consuls for 82. One of their first acts was to declare hostes, enemies of the people of Rome, all those senators who had joined Sulla. Technically, it meant that these men were now outlaws, to be denied fire, water, or shelter, and their property was confiscated. It was intended, probably successfully, to deter anyone else from declaring for Sulla. The two hostile forces moved in scattered groups around Italy. One of the Marian armies under Sarbo faced Sulla's general Metilius Pius in the north of Italy, while another, under the young Marius, faced Sulla in Latium in an effort to prevent him from reaching Rome. Pompey had joined Metellus Pius as a subordinate officer alongside Marcus Licinius Crassus. There may have been an element of truth in the story that Pompey dissuaded Sulla from appointing him as commander of a whole of a whole northern army because Metellus Pius was a consular rank and therefore the most senior officer. Pompey wrote to Metellus, offering his services, thus avoiding ill feelings, and also gaining in stature by his correct actions. It cost him nothing, not loss of face, nor even loss of power, since he was not really relinquishing command of his soldiers. He still conducted military operations independently, chasing Tadbo's army into Arunium northern Rimini, and defeating one of Carbo's legates, Gaius Marius, at Sena Gallica. Sometime later, Pompey and Crassus defeated another legate, legate, Carinas, near the town of Spoletium. But although they killed many of Carina's men, they failed to capture the legate himself, who slipped away at the dead of night. The same thing happened again when Pompey faced Gaius Marius for the second time. Gaius Marcius for the second time. Marcius commanded a much larger army at this encounter, but Pompey trapped him in a defile and then encircled him on a hill where his troops retreated. It ought to have been an easy victory, but Pompey was perhaps overconfident and did not prime his guards properly, since Marcius and his men left their campfires burning while they evaded Pompey's lookouts and escaped. Instead of of a battle next morning, there was only disappointment, and perhaps not a little private rage. It was the oldest trick of all. The civil war between the Marians and Sulla began to spread out into the rest of the Roman world. One of the generals who had espoused the Marian cause, Quintus Sertorius, had begun to uh, to despair of of success and decamped to Spain, where he was eventually joined by others of like persuasion. He was an able administrator and a brilliant general, and was able to survive through many years without completely alienating the natives or being defeated by any of the armies sent against him, thus prolonging the war for at least another decade. Nearer to Rome, the civil war had began to affect the tribes of Italy. Seminites, a fierce and intransigent people had refused to disarm after the social war, and as a consequence, their leaders had been executed by Sulla. They were therefore intent on revenge against him, and so declared for and marched to the aid of young Marius when Sulla ran on him in Praeneste and besieged him there. It ought to have signaled defeat for Sulla, or at least forced him to raise the siege, but the approach to Praeneste was through a narrow pass, of which Sulla immediately gained control by placing men on the heights on either side of it. In several battles he prevented the Samnites from approaching the city and also beat off attempts by Marius to break out. With Sulla tied down at Praeneste, Salvo chose this moment to attack Metellus in the north. But he abandoned the project when he discovered that the Gauls of northern Italy had joined Metellus. Finding the odds too great now that Metellus had been reinforced and despairing of ever dislodging Sulla, Carbo gave up and fled to Africa, abandoning his soldiers who were still willing to fight for him, and indeed carried on doing so until Pompey defeated them. There was now two potential wars to which Sulla would have to turn his attention once the fighting in Italy was over, one in Sertorius in Spain, and another with Carbo in Africa. where there were many veterans who had fought against Jugurtha under Marius himself. These men would no doubt rally to Talbot and provide him with another army. But before Sulla could attend to anything, there was a much more pressing problem nearer to home. The Samnites had, di- had diverted the focus of their attack with an agenda to enlarge now with an agenda now enlarged by from revenge on Sulla to the annihilation of what he stood for, namely Rome herself. They already had a head start, and Sulla was forced to race after them. He left Pompey in the north and took Crassus and his men with him in a desperate march, engaging battle as soon as he arrived outside the city. He placed Crassus in command of the right wing, taking the left for himself, fighting immediately outside the Colline gate. His troops were tired and steadily overrun. They were forced backwards to the city, with the Samnites so close behind them that the enemy almost managed to force their way in, before the gates were closed in their faces. It seemed that all was lost. The Samnites were probably ready to besiege Rome, and Sulla was cut off from the northern troops. He had only depleted he had only a depleted army to defend the city, and he was not specially welcome there. His enemies inside Rome might ally with his enemies outside the city and bring about his downfall. He had no idea what had happened to Crassus. During the battle, it had been impossible to keep in touch with the right wing, and so probably assumed that assumed that Crassus had been defeated, possibly even killed. In the evening, some of Crassus's men arrived, not with dire news, but a request for supplies for the men's dinner. Crassus had driven the enemy off and routed them, and maybe was not aware that Sulla had so nearly met with disaster. He had saved the day, and perhaps Sulla rewarded him with the same praise that he bestowed on Pompey, but he did not give him independent commands or promote him as he had Pompey, and there perhaps the seeds were sown of the famous rivalry between the two men. Pompey had been just as successful fighting the abandoned army of Talbo, which he encountered and defeated near Clusium. The ones who escaped simply deserted. There was no army left. The soldiers and civilians of Praeneste now had no hope of any relief from an outside source, so they surrendered. The young Marius committed suicide, and his head was sent to Rome. Sulla watched while it was raised up on a spike, quoting bitterly from Artophanes, "First learn to row before you take the helm." Marius was only in his 20s, yet he had been elected consul, flouting all custom. Sulla disapproved and would pass laws to prevent such an occurrence, as merely the leader of a privately raised and very successful army. He had not yet committed the unforgivable sin of seeking the highest office, so Sulla could condone the actions of his favorite while condemning those of his enemy. And I think we'll finish here because the next would be the second chapter of this book, and I think I want to do this. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow. I don't know. I have theater classes tomorrow, so I don't know if I'm too tired when I get back home, and if it's too late, then I'll see. But if not, then I hope I will get back to it. But I'll definitely be here live on Thursday. Yeah. Um, Anyways, not many people turned out to this reading. Um, the Pompey the Great book doesn't seem to be doing so much great as the live reading last time also didn't get many people, but I'm enjoying that and that's what I really want. And if anybody else enjoys that, that's like a bonus for me. Um, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed the reading. I'll get back to it in a day or two, and I'll also get back maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll actually tomorrow I'll read The Enchanted Wood, since that's a little bit lighter than this, and then after on Thursday I'll read another part of this, and this time and that time I'll do it for 1 hour. But yeah, uh, hope you enjoyed the reading and have a great night. Bye bye.